He was the greatest smuggler in American history.
No, he was very shrewd. He was very smart. He was very calculating.
His customized superplane evaded sophisticated radar and outran government air patrols.
He's an outstanding pilot.
And landed tons of drugs in the last place authorities expected.
Compared to anyone else in the drug business, he was a genius.
Find out how he did it, next on Masterminds. In the early 1980s, the Reagan administration declared war on drug smugglers.
Our commitment to this program is unshakable.
Colombian drug cartels were hiring Americans to fly their narcotics into the U.S. Authorities identified Florida as the main point of entry and learned the smugglers fit a consistent profile.
The individuals with the flashy gold and the watches and as I refer to as the Miami Vice type that you know, they want to almost advertise that I am a drug smuggler.
Customs and drug enforcement agents targeted these smugglers.
The government subsequently put more agents down in Florida to combat this.
A secret network of sophisticated radar was installed throughout Florida and the Gulf Coast.
The government also put up a bunch of planes that were basically flying radar systems designed to catch drug smugglers.
Air patrols created a massive dragnet over land and sea. All suspicious vessels were tracked and targeted.
80% of your risk of being arrested is entering the shoreline of the United States, being intercepted by Customs or DEA.
Authorities' efforts paid off. Drug rings were busted. Tons of narcotics were confiscated. Millions of dollars were recovered. And the smugglers themselves were chased out of the sky.
If you looked around down in Miami and down around off the Bahamas, all you're going to see is crashed airplanes.
In spite of their success, however, the DEA realized one smuggler was eluding their security net and landing billions of dollars worth of cocaine. They launched a massive manhunt.
This investigation was considered the #1 case in DEA worldwide.
But authorities couldn't find him because they were looking in the wrong place. This smuggler didn't operate out of Florida and didn't fit the profile. He was an upstanding businessman living in small-town Pennsylvania. Rik Luytjes was a friend of President's, a world-class aviation expert, and the mastermind who smuggled 10 tons of cocaine into the U.S., lining his pockets with millions.
He brought in more cocaine than any other drug smuggling ring in this country, and that's quite an achievement.
The question is, how did he do it? Rik Luytjes is America's most successful smuggler, flying over $20 billion of cocaine into the U.S. From an early age, Luytjes is obsessed with flight.
He just loved to fly. He got his pilot's license when he was still in high school. He was gifted at flying and at the mechanics of the planes.
After graduating college in the late 70s with a degree in aeronautics, Luytjes starts a business in Scranton, Pennsylvania, called Air America. The company specializes in luxury upgrades to small planes.
If you're flying a plane to Canada, it's nice if you don't have to stop to refuel. Bring your plane to Rik, pay him $100,000, and he can outfit it.
The quality of work that came out of Air America was top-notch. It was excellent.
Air America was very well known and had a very good reputation in the airline industry.
He was really good to his workers. He paid them a fair wage, more than a fair wage. They all liked him.
Rik donates to local charities, befriends the police, even flies the state governor around on business.
He ingratiated himself with politicians, with government officials, with leaders of the community.
Air America thrives until recession hits hard in 1980. Rik's corporate clients are replaced by shady characters, requesting their planes be outfitted with hidden cargo space. One of them insists on paying his bill with a bag containing 3,000 Quaaludes. Desperate for cash, Rik tries to sell them.
Well, his mechanic happened to know somebody down in Philly that could probably move these things. One of the first sales he made was to an undercover cop.
Rik is arrested and questioned. Authorities quickly determine he's a financially strapped businessman, not a serious dealer. But because the DEA suspects his company is being used by drug runners to modify their planes, they offer him a deal.
The DEA recruited him almost immediately off of that Quaalude thing.
In return for dropping the charges, Luytjes agrees to report any suspicious activity at Air America.
So he was kind of in the drug business, whether you liked it or not.
Rik realizes the DEA is right. Many of his clients are drug smugglers, and they're making millions more than him. Then, in 1981, one of Rik's shady customers offers him a big payday to pilot for a Tampa pot smuggling ring. With Air America now on the brink of bankruptcy, Luytjes accepts.
Long-range goal, he wasn't going to stay in that business forever. At least that wasn't his original intent. The original intent was to make a little money, boost his business up so he could turn his back on smuggling.
But Rik quickly discovers the people he's hired to fly for are amateurs.
Most drug smugglers were people who used the merchandise themselves. They weren't the most stable, reliable people. He commented to his friends about how sloppy they were.
Fuel tanks sit dangerously exposed in the cabin. And the route he's forced to fly is crawling with DEA. But Luytjes manages to land the plane and earn his money. After flying 2 more runs, he quits the ring. But his professionalism brings him to the attention of Jorge Ochoa.
Jorge Ochoa was one of the main members of the Medellin cartel, which was a group of individuals who controlled the cocaine coming into the United States. When you have access to a person like Jorge Ochoa and you work directly for him transporting his cocaine, you can't get any bigger than that.
Ochoa dazzles Rik with promises of millions and all the adventure he can handle, smuggling the cartel's cocaine. Still in desperate need of money, Rik accepts, but the Colombian leaves him with a warning.
If you cheat us, we'll kill you. Rik accepted that and came home.
The problem Luytjes now faces is how to make the 6,000-mile round trip from Pennsylvania to Colombia. He knows landing to refuel during the voyage risks alerting authorities. But the only aircraft that can fly non-stop are large cargo planes.
Those airplanes get on the watch list right off. And eventually those airplanes get caught.
So Rik sets out to turn an innocent-looking Cessna 310, designed to fly 900 miles, into a long-distance superplane. The first step is to increase fuel capacity.
Rik took a plane that would normally carry 2,000 gallons of fuel and outfit them so they could carry 6,000.
But the government had law enforcement looking for airplanes that had tanks inside the cabin or suspicious-looking plumbing.
So Luytjes stores extra fuel in rubber bladders, hidden in the nose, under the cabin floor, in the luggage compartments, and in hollow spaces in the wings.
The plane was basically a flying fuel tank.
To control the flow of fuel from these extra tanks, Luytjes builds a centralized distribution system that supplies the engines evenly while maintaining aircraft balance. But with added fuel comes added weight.
Once you add that much fuel, you needed to reinforce the wings, you needed to reinforce the wheel struts, you needed to increase the strength of the engines. So he would put in engines with much more horsepower. Anyone looking at it would say there's no way that plane can fly from here to Colombia.
To avoid suspicion from authorities, Luytjes obtains an FAA certificate declaring all the modifications perfectly legal.
And law enforcement doesn't have any probable cause to mess with the airplane.
Inside the cockpit, Rik installs custom-designed radar to alert him to weather conditions and government air patrols.
If Rik was a genius, it wasn't only equipping the planes, it was figuring out a way of evading the radar and drug enforcement system.
To defeat the DEA security dragnet, Luytjes targets a crooked customs agent who sells him a list of radar locations, plus flight paths and schedules of all coastal patrol aircraft. He also sets up a radio network spanning 2 continents and develops a secret communications code to keep in contact with the cartel during flight.
No, he was very shrewd. He was very smart. He was very calculating. It was obvious he put a lot of thought into each step that he did.
Throughout his preparations, Rik is careful not to arouse the suspicion of his contacts in the DEA.
The agents got very close to Rik. Part of it was that he is a charming guy, and I think he charmed them.
Finally, after 3 months of planning, Rik takes off on his maiden voyage and flies a direct route to Colombia. 13 hours later, he arrives. While the Colombians load his plane with coke, Rik makes a careful calculation of the plane's new weight and the exact length and state of the runway.
The trouble is the fields that they were taking off from were generally unpaved. There were trees at the end.
After a short rest, Rik departs. His tiny plane carries 800 pounds of cocaine and is 2,000 pounds heavier than the recommended limit.
The plane had to struggle to get off the ground and clear those trees. And off the coast of Colombia, there are a lot of wrecks of planes that didn't quite make it.
The engine modifications and upgraded horsepower in Rik's plane get him safely airborne, but he doesn't return home by the same route. Instead, he takes a new flight path that authorities had never even considered, the 73rd Meridian.
He'd figured out that if he could equip the planes to fly further, he would stay out of the pattern of radar detection.
But 5 hours into the flight, Rik's custom-built aircraft detection system alerts him to a Navy tracker plane hot on his tail. Using his weather radar, he locates a nearby electrical storm.
If you're getting painted by radar and what you're worried about is being caught and going to jail for the rest of your life, you might be willing to go into a storm assuming that the law enforcement pilot's not going to do that.
To escape, Rik flies straight into the heart of the storm.
Rik was an outstanding pilot. If he wasn't the best drug smuggling pilot, he was damn close.
The Navy vessel refuses to follow and loses him on the radar. 2 hours later, Rik emerges from the storm and turns sharply inland. Flying below radar, he heads for an abandoned commuter landing strip. He approaches the runway, but instead of landing, he rises sharply to 1,500 feet. After flying 3,000 miles from Colombia, he appears on radar for the first time.
He would fly very low altitudes to penetrate the radar and pop up so he could look as though he's a normal airplane.
Rik then radios the Scranton control tower and has them log his flight as a brief commuter hop. Arriving safely home, he unloads 800 pounds of cocaine and collects over $1 million. His success, however, will be threatened when his Florida pot smuggling days come back to haunt him. Rik Luytjes has been paid over $1 million by the Medellin cartel for smuggling 800 pounds of cocaine into the U.S. The cartel is so impressed, they have Rik make regular runs for them over the next year.
Rik was in it because it was an adventure, and the money allowed him to do the adventurous things that he wanted to do.
Gaining confidence, he now expands his operations, hiring extra pilots and increasing flights.
It's like you feeding a mouse to a big cobra. You're going to be really careful the first couple of times you do it. But if that cobra doesn't bite you, pretty soon you're just casually lifting the lid, throwing the mouse in and closing the lid. And you do that time and time again.
Luytjes prides himself on the efficiency of the operation.
He used to joke that he was the Federal Express of the drug business.
Rik used to brag that he would be plus or minus 3 minutes of any time you told him anywhere in the world.
The first 4 trips we did, the Colombians were ready for us. When we were ready for the 5th trip, the Colombians told us we had to wait because we ran them out of product. They were giddy with the schedule.
They never lost a flight, never crashed. They always delivered on time, and the Colombians appreciated that. They even gave him a raise.
Meanwhile, the DEA, not realizing that Rik is a smuggler, lean on him for more information about the drug trade.
And he did manage to provide a lot of useful information, but it was very strategically chosen.
Then, in 1984, disaster strikes.
One day the cobra's pissed, and he bites you. You see, you think, why did that happen? That's never happened before.
The Tampa pot ring that Luytjes flew his first smuggling runs with is busted. He is indicted along with 15 others and sent to Florida for trial.
Rik's defense was, yes, he flew those runs, but he was only doing that in order to gain information about this nasty drug ring for his friends in the government.
Luytjes even convinces his DEA handlers to testify on his behalf.
They all either came down or wrote testimonials to his fine, upstanding character.
But Rik's biggest fear is the Colombians. To convince them that he's not ratting them out, he flies coke runs every weekend during the trial.
Each weekend he'd come home and dropped his lawyers off, hopped in the airplane and went to Colombia and brought a load back.
He'd bring in 200 to 300 kilos of coke, drop them off, get a little bit of sleep, and fly back down to Florida on Sunday to be ready to sit in trial again Monday morning. The trial lasted 11 weeks, and during that time he made 11 flights smuggling cocaine.
Rik makes $13 million flying these drug runs and is the only defendant. The jury acquits. But Rik's enormous smuggling success leaves him with millions of dollars to launder. He enlists a corporate Scranton banker, Michael Coffey, to hide the cash offshore.
Michael Coffey helped launder Rik's money by not filling out the proper documentation.
Michael was ambitious, and he made a little extra for providing this service.
But Rik suddenly faces a bigger issue. Jim Cooper is in police custody. He has crashed his plane into the car of a man waiting to offload drugs and killed him.
Everybody says I crashed the airplane on top of this car. And I say, this guy parked his car underneath my airplane. He had done cocaine all day long and was blitzed out of his head, and he and I met in the middle of the runway.
When Cooper is charged with felony murder, his first call is to Rik Luytjes.
Rik had the option of throwing a little money my way. He could have said, look, you need to disappear, go down the islands and get a tan for about 9 months. But he didn't choose that.
Jim was facing up to 20 years in jail, and instead he worked out a plea deal where he didn't get any jail time, and in exchange he provided information about Rik.
Armed with Cooper's confession, the DEA makes its move on Air America and Rik Luytjes.
And the way we did that was what we referred to as following a paper trail. In other words, going after where he landed an airplane, finding out there was a gas receipt, where he purchased radio equipment, finding out there was receipts for that.
The feds also bring in a money laundering specialist to examine Rik's bank transactions. Realizing authorities are closing in, Luytjes immediately wires $30 million to the Cayman island of St. Eustatius and flees there himself.
St. Eustatius and a lot of the islands don't have extradition treaties with the United States.
Forensic accountants trace his money to the island, and the DEA appeals to local authorities.
Myself and another agent provided information showing that Rik was wanted back in the United States.
They prevailed upon the government there to deport him as an undesirable alien.
St. Eustatius law enforcement agrees to cooperate. In 1986, Rik is arrested by local police, taken to the airport, and handed over to the DEA.
They got him, put him on a plane, brought him back. And when they got into U.S. airspace, they told him he was under arrest.
Rik is charged with conspiracy to smuggle cocaine. To avoid 345 years in jail, he cooperates with the investigation and reveals where he has hidden the cash.
We seized over $21 million in cash and/or assets.
He also gives up his team, all of whom end up serving time. Rik himself goes to jail for 8.5 years.
Rik was a combination of Christopher Columbus and Charles Lindbergh.
Rik wasn't afraid to take a risk. He wasn't afraid to learn about something he knew nothing about.
Compared to anyone else in the drug business, he was a genius.
Bottom line is, he hurt a lot of people. I mean, you bring in 9 tons of cocaine, you're hurting people. You're hurting children, you're hurting families, you're hurting people.
Since his release, Rik Luytjes has gone straight and started a new life in Florida.
Last thing I heard, he was living in a place called Smuggler's Cove. Very apropos.
He ran the biggest airport theft operation in North America.
He had everything, had it all. That's the only way to describe it.
For years, police were fooled by his ingenious system.
He is a mastermind because he stayed under the radar. You got to respect him for that.
He sought inspiration for his crimes in a Buddhist temple.
He had $1,000 bills in frames posted on the walls, and he would pray to the money.
And made over $7 million. Find out how he did it next on Masterminds. Pearson Airport in Toronto has some of the largest cargo terminals in the world. The biggest is the size of 2 football fields.
It's just a monster of a facility, all computerized, and every day cargo comes in and out of that location.
Millions upon millions of dollars of goods every day arrive in the morning, evening, and night, and it is nonstop. If you wanted to steal within that cargo facility, there's a lot of product. It's like walking into a large candy store.
The candy store was protected by a force of over 100 police officers on full-time airport duty. But in the late 80s, authorities discovered entire skids of high-end products, some worth up to $500,000, were disappearing.
The cargo that was missing was staggering. We had Canon cameras, we had Fujitsu hard drives, we had Kodak cameras.
They had every Kodak camera that was destined for Toronto area for the Christmas season.
We had Nike products, including their merchandising, their clothing. We had the entire spring collection of Banana Republic stolen. We're looking at $6 million worth of product missing and unaccounted for. If it wasn't nailed down, it was being taken.
Police formed a task force to discover how the thieves were bypassing the airport's heavy security.
Everything is secure on that perimeter. You got a wall or high-stake fence with barbed wire. There are video cameras monitoring it, and everyone can see video cameras posted nearby. There are also security guards posted. They view your tag, check its validity, and then allow you access.
But in spite of these precautions, cargo kept disappearing, and years of police investigations went nowhere.
There are a number of difficulties inherent in investigating any occurrence at the airport. Typically they call us saying we can't find merchandise in our vast warehouse and now we believe it's stolen. Can you investigate the theft from a week ago?
Police found the closed world of the air cargo workers impossible to penetrate.
The employees we spoke to were very guarded with some of their remarks. Those people have worked together for such a long time that anybody that tries or attempts to infiltrate those groups is looked upon as an outsider.
If we are doing surveillance at a mall, we could blend in with thousands of other cars. At the airport, it's not like that.
But their investigation did lead police to one conclusion. The thefts were the work of an organized crime ring operating inside the airport.
The reason why we thought it was a large number of people was you needed to know all of the ins and outs of the cargo operations, the flight landings, the way bills, the information that came on those way bills. You had to know people in security, you had to know supervisors, managers, you had to know drivers. So all of these factored into our idea of that it was a large group of people stealing the stuff out of cargo.
But the police were wrong. The thefts weren't the product of a large criminal organization. They were the work of a lone truck driver. Hoa Lam Ong had found a way to bypass security, steal over $7 million in cargo, and sell it worldwide. The question is, how did he do it? Hoa Lam Ong emigrates from Vietnam to Toronto in the late 1980s.
He came with $50 in his pocket when he arrived in Canada.
But Ong has a burning desire to become rich, hidden beneath an easygoing charm.
He always was kind of like a center point whenever you would see him meeting other people. He seemed to stick out, and he had a bubbly personality.
In the tight-knit Asian community, he makes friends easily and earns the nickname Smiley. He soon meets a fellow Vietnamese immigrant, Teresa Pang, at his local Buddhist temple.
They met through a mutual friend. Sparks flew, and next thing you know, they were married.
Smiley moves into Teresa's apartment and adopts her teenage son, Benny.
Teresa worked at Golden Jet Freight Forwarding out of Pearson Airport. They're responsible for shipping property from the cargo facilities.
She helps Smiley get work with Best Choice, another shipping company. His job is to pick up goods from the airport and deliver them to businesses throughout the city. But it pays only $400 a week. To realize his dream of making it big, he decides to break the law.
Everybody's human. Everybody's got their threshold. What point do you break? How bad do you need the money? That's what it really comes down to.
Smiley calculates that if he can keep even a fraction of the merchandise that passes through his hands, he'll be a very rich man. He spends months trying to gain access to the goods inside the cargo facility.
Within cargo, you must display your pass, and you must have it on you at all times.
The problem is, Smiley's pass limits him to a tiny area of the warehouse. He realizes the only way to steal the goods is to get the cargo workers on his side.
He had a way of dealing with people.
You gotta be able to be smooth. You gotta be able to have the gift, the gab.
He's interacting with employees all around the airport and developing relationships, sizing them up.
Smiley gets to know the guys and quickly identifies who's hard up for cash.
Over a period of time, he would offer them gifts. He would hand them a box of frozen lobster and say, hey, you know, the next time I see you, maybe you can help me out.
So he'd come in for a legitimate load. He'd pick up 3 or 4 skids in his truck.
Then he would approach an employee within the cargo facility, ask them if they could throw something extra on his truck, and he could supply them with some extra money.
Smiley invests every dollar he has to kickstart his cargo theft operation. But now that he has the goods, he needs a way to sell them.
In the beginning, when he started working, Smiley would search people out for the goods.
He started off small and was selling it through different friends, different fences as we call them.
That could be people that own flea markets, that could be people that own computer companies, clothing companies, various merchandise stores. He had to have all those connections within his community. And that's where his empire started to grow.
Using his profits, he starts drawing in more accomplices.
Smiley carries a wad of cash with him. 50s, 100s, people referred to him as always having a lot of money. And that would allow for instant payment for property.
But Smiley's ability to buy everything cargo workers have to offer soon creates a serious problem.
Some of the property is very difficult to move in high volume. It's quite difficult to get rid of 80 pairs of pants within a day unless you've got a clothing buyer, and there's not quite as many of those people as there are for electronic companies that are willing to buy 80 of a particular item.
But help is close at hand. Through her shipping job, Teresa has access to detailed information about incoming cargo.
Teresa was very important to Smiley. She would tell him the flight that it came in on, the amount that it's worth, which area that this product would be brought into. The two of them were like two peas in a pod. They bounced ideas off of one another. They knew that they had to survive together in order for this operation to continue.
Using the information from Teresa, Smiley carefully studies what cargo is going to which warehouse. He cross-references this to lists of employees he knows he can bribe.
Smiley would look at his schedules and figure out who was working, what time the product was coming in. So he's very keyed in on those factors. He had to have a group of people working within that could be anywhere from 5 to 10 people on any given day.
By targeting expensive goods that are in demand, Smiley is now able to pay up to $10,000 for a single skid of merchandise. His accomplices inside the warehouse inform him when the most desirable cargo will be available.
Then it just began to grow and grow, and it was like a snowball rolling down the hill. It just, it was incredible.
But as Smiley further expands his network of connections, it draws the attention of organized crime gangs. They demand a piece of the action.
The message given out by a lot of these guys was that, hey, you mess with us and life won't be the same for you.
He would have to pay certain people within that facility a certain amount of money in order to continue operating.
Smiley makes the payoffs and stays in business. Now free to steal with impunity, he turns over his distribution network to stepson Benny Pang.
He had to get some people around him that he trusted that could help him move that product and make extra money. Benny was utilized by his stepfather as just a pawn in the scheme of things.
Smiley assigns Benny to sell computer parts to small businesses throughout the city.
He would go and profess that he was a part of this particular company and sell them hard drives at a good price, and he sold a lot of them there.
To make the business look legitimate, Smiley prints professional-looking invoices and business cards for Benny.
The business cards he had were first name of Joe, and some of those computer store operators knew him as Joe Hard Drive.
A lot of these companies thought they were actually buying a legitimate product.
Benny proves to be an excellent salesman, but even he can't move all of Smiley's growing inventory.
The business was being overwhelmed. His ability to bring the goods in was much better than Mr. Pang's ability to move it out, and it was essentially stacking up.
Because renting public storage space is risky, he buys 2 suburban houses.
Smiley used them as a storage facility for all the product that was being stolen out of Pearson cargo warehouses. It was a great way for Smiley to wash money through real estate, buy some property and investments that would make money over time.
When his new neighbors meet him, Smiley turns on the charm.
They acknowledged that they had seen some of this activity, but Smiley was very friendly, and he said, I'm, shipper-receiver, and they bought into that, so they never questioned whether or not he was involved in some sort of illicit activity.
Smiley now expands his operation to cover the entire airport.
I guess they figured, this stuff is selling. The more we can get, the more we can sell. These guys were just getting bigger and bigger.
Smiley Ong is at the top of his game, making millions. But a random break and enter will soon threaten to bring him down. Smiley Ong's cargo theft operation is now North America's largest, but he's struggling to sell his enormous inventory. He turns to his Buddhist faith for inspiration and flies in a monk from China.
Both houses had a prayer room, and these rooms were immaculate. They didn't have any stolen property in them, simply areas for prayer. Prosperity is certainly one thing that you pray for. They had $1,000 bills in frames posted on the walls, and they would pray to the money.
Smiley's prayers are answered by the internet. He instructs Benny to set up an account with eBay.
And this is where a lot of the money was made, selling the stuff at a cheaper price and not having to go out and physically drop off the product, which made it much easier.
It's a dream for anybody selling stolen property. And basically, it's a license to print money.
It's also a dream for a seller who wants to hide his identity.
When they registered their name with eBay, they had the credit cards didn't belong to them. They had addresses that were fictitious.
Smiley now creates an eBay assembly line. For the first time, he can quickly move products like cameras and clothes that are hard to sell door to door. Benny monitors the bidding. Teresa is the shipping department.
He had everything, had it all. It was a mail-order Costco is what it was. That's the only way to describe it.
There was 19,000 transactions in total. We're talking a lot of checks and a lot of cash. We're talking about thousands of dollars of goods per day.
He had a lot of money, he did, and he didn't show it by the way he dressed or what he drove.
By day, he continues to keep a low profile, working his connections at the airport. But by night, Smiley hits the casinos to launder his cash.
To launder money at a casino, you put down a couple $1,000s. You might lose $300 or $400 that night, but once you go to reclaim your money, the money's already washed. You'll come back out with $20 bills and $50 bills.
Smiley also makes sure his business contacts at the airport are kept happy.
He used to bring people out to strip bars and would pay for their night out. And they thought he was the best guy in the world.
He ran a well-oiled machine. It was almost like a corporation, and he managed to do it, and he managed to do it well.
13 years into the investigation, police are no closer to identifying the mastermind. They intensify their efforts by going undercover, but still can't determine when a crime is occurring.
If you watch the cargo being loaded onto various trucks within that facility, you wouldn't be able to tell if it was actually being stolen right in front of your face or it was just business as usual.
It's also nearly impossible to narrow down the list of suspects.
On any given theft in the cargo facility, you'd have 300 suspects. But it just takes one mastermind to actually figure out a system and put their system in place. And once that system's in place, it takes investigators a long time to actually follow it.
Smiley definitely stayed under the radar of most investigative techniques.
But then in November 2001, police finally get a break. Within a skid of cargo Smiley steals is a box of hard drives. As soon as the theft is reported, police enter the serial numbers of these hard drives into a new system designed to track stolen goods.
Something gets stolen in Toronto, you put it in the system, and every police department in Canada has access to that and can check it. So, being able to locate stolen property is so much easier.
A week later, Benny Pang sells the stolen hard drives to a computer parts company.
That computer company put them in their warehouse, and on that very same weekend, that warehouse gets broken into.
The thieves take the same hard drives that Smiley had stolen from the airport. Police discover that the product serial numbers from the computer company theft match the numbers from the airport theft. For the first time, police have traced some of the stolen goods.
This was a huge, huge break in the case for us. We finally realized that we were going to be able to track where the product was being stolen from and where it was going.
Police questioned the computer merchant whose warehouse had been robbed.
We asked the owner, "Who are you purchasing these hard drives from?" He indicated all he had was a pager number and a name of Joe.
When investigators check the number, they discover it belongs to Benny Pang.
And that was our first breakthrough to find out who actually was bringing these hard drives to these various computer companies.
Police begin surveillance on Benny.
The surveillance took us all across Toronto, and he'd be meeting people in parking lots, going to their houses. We knew we had the right player. The surveillance was quite intense. It led us to a lot.
They open the garage door. It's a wall of property.
We found out that the owner of the house was Mr. Smiley, Ho'olam.
But police hold off on making an arrest.
We knew that we had to build a larger case to find out where the product was coming from, where it was going to, and we had to actually physically see that.
Investigators follow Smiley to Best Choice.
That was the key. We were ecstatic. We had waited so long for so many years, and we finally had our connection.
13 years after Smiley Ong began stealing air cargo, police are ready to make their move.
And at some point in time, you say, okay, we've got enough. Let's close the door, let's get it done. We had Benny by the short and curlies, basically. Benny was done. We had him good.
On December 13th, 2001, they take down Benny at one of the storage houses.
Benny Pang was surprised. He was just shocked.
Now the police move on Smiley and Teresa.
Teresa Pang, along with Smiley, opened the door, and they were standing there in their pajamas. They were very surprised. They realized that the jig was up. You could tell through their eyes that they looked like two deers caught in the headlights of a large steamroller.
Then he proceeded to go in with the videotape, and that's when everybody's jaw hit the floor. In our wildest dreams, we never thought there was that much property there.
You could hear people shouting, "You need to come down and look at the room I'm in." And I was shouting, "You need to come up and look at the room that I'm in," because every room is stacked with stolen property.
They had so much property, they barely had room to move.
The police are also staggered by the amount of cash they find.
There was money everywhere. $80,000 in a Versace wallet. There was money hidden under the night table. There was money in Benny's room.
The total value of currency that was recovered was in excess of $1 million. I believe it was $1.2 million.
Smiley Ong and Teresa and Benny Pang are arrested on the charge of possessing stolen property. Before trial, Smiley agrees to plead guilty on the condition that Teresa and Benny are released.
Ho'olam Ong stepped up and acknowledged that he was fully responsible for the entire operation, and he was the only one that was sentenced.
Because he cooperates with police and forfeits over $6 million in cash and property, master thief Smiley Ong gets a reduced sentence. In March 2004, he starts serving a 2-year prison term.
We cut the heart out of the operation. Since our arrests of Smiley's organization, we haven't had a major organized theft at Pearson Airport.
He was well organized, he knew what he was doing, he was very determined, and had a good business plan, probably a business plan that the Bank of Montreal would have approved if it was legitimate.
Smiley is a mastermind because he managed to keep himself afloat and always stayed under the radar. You got to respect him for that.